Little Miss Curious. Little Miss Curious is a very curious sort of person. Just look at her house. It's a very curious shape, isn't it? It's in the shape of a question mark. Now look at her garden. That's curious too, isn't it? Question marks everywhere. Now look at Miss Curious. She's rather curious looking too. And she also has a very curious nature. She wants to know how, why, and what of everything. There she is, Little Miss Curious. One day, Little Miss Curious set off for town. Why do doors squeak? But are not small and furry with pink ears and long tails? She asked the door as she went out. Understandably, the door didn't answer. There she is. Why do flowers live in beds but never sleep? And she asked the flower bed in her garden. They just smiled knowingly. There they are, happy flowers, just smiling away. Then she saw a worm. Why do worms in nonsense land wear bow ties, she asked. That's for me to know and you to find out about, laughed the worm. Later, on the way to town, Little Miss Curious met Mr. Nonsense. Are you curious to find out what she asked him? Well, go on then, turn over. There she is, catching up with him. I'm curious, began Little Miss Curious, to know why it is that sandwiches are called sandwiches if they don't have any sand in them. It just so happens, said Mr. Nonsense, that this is a sand sandwich. I'm rather partial to sand. There he is, eating a sand sandwich. Happy Christmas, he said. Then Mr. Nonsense ran away, holding his sandwich carefully so the sand didn't fall out. There he is, on his way. Little Miss Curious eventually arrived in town. Did I hear you ask why? Well, you are curious, aren't you? But are you as curious as Little Miss Curious? There she is, going into a building. Little Miss Curious had gone to visit the library. I wonder, would you be able to help me, she asked. Of course, said Mrs. Page, the librarian. What are you looking for? I'm looking for a book, began Little Miss Curious. A book that will tell me why the sky is blue. There she is, asking the librarian. And why combs have teeth but can't bite. And why chairs have legs but can't play football. And why. And she went on and on and on until there was a very long queue behind her that was growing longer by the minute. There she is, and everyone's piling up behind her. That's enough, cried Mrs. Page. Next, please. But why? Little Miss Curious started to ask. But without quite knowing how or why, she suddenly found herself out on the street. How curious, Little Miss Curious thought to herself. There's Mrs. Page, the librarian. She does not look happy. As she walked along the street, Little Miss Curious asked herself, why is everybody giving me such curious looks? And why is Little Miss Careful waving her umbrella at me? Is it because it's going to rain? We don't think so, do we? There she is, Little Miss Careful waving her umbrella. Little Miss Curious ran off. Are you going to ask why? Are you becoming as curious as Little Miss Curious? Can you guess where she ran off to? There she is, running down the path. Neither can I. Come back, Little Miss Curious, and tell us where you're going. You see, we're all ever so curious. Yes, we really are. The end. All right, sweetie, you have a good night's sleep tonight. Be good for mummy. Love you. Sweet dreams.